Yes, it's definitely happy hour, and we got Ron. You're supposed to make us happy. Talking, of course, about just how bad things can be. I don't know if that's going to make us happy. It shouldn't. Uh, it should make us need that drink even more.
Indeed. In
That's
fact, hopefully everybody does have a drink that it'd be very awkward if your speaker is sitting here imbibing when nobody else is. So if you are, hey, toast to everybody. Thanks for spending time this afternoon, on what's probably a busy Tuesday for everyone. And well, again, quickly, my name's Ron Pelletier, and the founder of Pondurance. This is back in 2008. So my career goes back starting in the military active service. Then I was with Ernst and Young, EY now, for about 9 years. And then 2008, I started Pondurance and have been doing that since. And so, I have now the privilege of spending more time with the customers that we help cultivate as the chief customer officer, and that's a great place for me to be. I get to work with Mariana, which is always fantastic, and so it's great. And so again, I really thank you, for your time. I won't go into too much more about me. I don't like to talk about myself too much, but let's look at the agenda quickly. And yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be straight with you guys. As a small, intimate group. First of all, I guess let's say that uh, I put the content together, but man, this is your presentation. So at any time, please stop if you want clarification or if there's something else, a point need to be made, please do. I tend to talk fast sometimes, and I will carry on if I don't hear an interruption. So just don't be afraid to barge in and go ahead and stop me. But I would love it if this is a dynamic conversation where you sort of feel comfortable with interjecting a thought, comment, question, anything else. So this is the agenda for today, and where I was going initially is I'm not going to lie about this. It's going to seem very cynical and down at first, but there's a point to that because there are ways that we can pull ourselves out of it. Let's take care of what we can take care of, and that's going to be really the gist of that is getting really focused on the domain controller. So as we before we start, I thought maybe best let me tell you a little bit about Pondurance and our mission. I mean, the bottom line is that we always have been a very people-centric organization, and our goal is to enable the human element to be the difference maker where security is concerned. And in doing that, we want to bring practical and cost-effective solutions that serve the large and small organizations alike. And when we look at the optimal function of the service managed detection and response, we bring a very holistic solution that is also both flexible and interlocking in coverage, which is important. And importantly, too, it's a solution that scales and evolves as does the threat universe that we face. So what makes us different, from other MSSPs or traditional tools vendors, and again, I'm not speaking pejoratively about them, I'm just stating that our focus, our concentration is security. That's what we do on a 24 by 7 basis. But we bring a dynamic level of defense that doesn't place undue reliance on technology alone. That human element, really makes all the difference. And we have to make the human stronger by surrounding them with great tech, and that symbiosis is really a multiplier to that effectiveness. And I used to use military analogies like, our services like the F-35 fighter jet or the emergent exoskeleton suit, which, clearly are not void of the human. They make the human stronger, right? You center it around the human. But I think it's more fun, and this seems like a good light group that, I've been reading Orson Scott Card's classic Ender's Game series and all the prequels. And so you can imagine if you have this, and some of you may not know what this is, but this Ansible, this key piece of technology, which they call it the Phyllotic Parallax instantaneous communicator, and I'll test everyone at the end if they remember that. Essentially, a machine capable of communicating across infinite distances with no time delay, right? But the communication is leveraged and enabled by whom? By humans, right? And so we have not at Pondurance created the Ansible, or anything close to it, but we do have a full team of vetted security experts and advisors that are in the trenches every day with our customers to help not only with 24/7 detection and response, but also continue to help them mature and optimize their security programs. So we'll go, whoops. go to the next slide here. Yeah, so here's where we start to get a little cynical as we start to dive in and set the stage. Near the start of the pandemic, when there were some announcements, even by more prominent hacker groups, bad actor groups like Maze, for instance, who came out and said, we're going to declare a ceasefire against medical organizations because they're going through a lot. Very noble, of them to do that, and an interesting position to take, which is really among a Wild West collection of actors that they, Maze, and others have even promised, some assistance to combat hackers or bad actors during this time, providing free keys if they might work, to help decrypt certain ransomware effects. It's hard to say if this ceasefire really amounted to more than anything than hyperbole, since we've not I guess seen a slowdown of any sorts, and I'm here to tell you it's we've got I think the last count was 40 active incidents based on some of the latest exchange exploits. And, we've not seen a slowdown in healthcare or any other industry, frankly. And, with the October bulletin, if you recall, just a while back, released jointly by the FBI, CISA, and HHS, it certainly seemed that, the game was officially back on at that point because there was a credible threat, a concerted threat against healthcare that they thought enough to give everybody a warning. And so, that was something, of concern. If we look at some of the impacts, that have emerged, through this, it's grown over time, right? You can see where the trend is going. And I think what's most interesting when you start looking at 2020 and what SolarWinds brought about, we're talking greater than 100 billion in terms of impact, and that's just a calculus that's been used to, try to come up with something. It's untold right now because it still hasn't landed officially on everyone that was attacked. And then you go to exchange, and now it's even more crazy because you can't even quantify in dollars what's happened there. And hopefully everyone, I don't want to talk past, what happened, but, with the state-based attack emanated from China is what experts are saying, that found exploits in Microsoft Exchange, and they ultimately were in the systems for quite a while. And unfortunately, in their wake, we now have the waters that are chummed, and we've got people, bad actors, that are now taking what they did and furthering those exploits, and then even complicating them more or building on those and finding additional holes in. So we're measuring the exchange breach right now in terms of company victims, 250,000. So you can imagine what the systemic nature of that attack and what the outcome in terms of impact might actually be, based on that. So, we've seen these big headlines over the years among this user populace that has been, desensitized, I guess, by a multitude of attacks taking place. It's hard to shock people anymore, with the enormity of scope, and not being able to escape this, whether it's the government or the public alike, particularly considering the scope of things like SolarWinds or, Exchange. And so we're seeing these attacks grow in frequency of occurrence and in boldness and systemic effect. So, I think I went past this one, unfortunately. So, all this is really saying is that, this is a compelling thing. Security is not going away, right? It's all about, taking a look at what's going to happen next. And the one on Microsoft at the bottom there, when they've got the hafnium, I think, exploit is what they're essentially naming it. They knew that there was going to be a lot of people, the waters were chummed, essentially, that were going to come in and take advantage of that. And they've deployed it, but they're still, anticipating a lot more impact, from that. Now, I love this quote. This is from, it hones in, I guess, first on the fact that we can never be zero defect, and we've got to get that mentality, out of our head, despite our best efforts. And our executive chair, Pondurance's executive chair, Nilu Hao, testified just today. So I took this from a quote she made today before the House Appropriations Committee on the topic of future defense spending. And she laid out before Congress a simple message: we need help, right? The reality of our digital world is the evolution of good old-fashioned espionage, where state-sponsored actors are wreaking havoc on our infrastructure. And it seems like a daunting task to try to secure our digital assets in what has become impossibly more difficult, right? It's bad enough that we're dealing with a set of actors that have, some limitations in either time, talent, maybe dollars. But when we compound that with state-sponsored groups that seemingly have this endless pool of resources, I'm feeling kind of screwed, right? What is there that we can really do about this? But the reality is we can't resign our efforts. We can't throw in the towel. We hope at that level that non-government professionals like Nilu can bring real-world experience and recommendations to influence a stubborn Congress, so that they can act and take actions that can certainly at least discourage these types of attacks. So again, without seeming like the eternal pessimist, let's bring this back down to something that is more manageable, things that we can have more influence on and directly control. And so we're going to talk about, in this case, on the protection of the domain controller. So let's go
Before
there.
we go there, Ron,
Please.
if
Yeah.
I could just add, first of all, kudos to you and your colleague for testifying in front of Congress and getting that message out. So, I mean, that's because that's the same as the Secure the Village message that way. And it's not, and like you, it's not the pessimism at the bottom, but the knowledge that if we all work together creatively and collectively, that we can dig ourselves out of this hole and come out stronger rather than weaker by doing so. So kudos on that.
That's right, Stan. I mean, I love that message that you've created, or just, carried forward, that it does take a village, right? It does take a collective group of smart people, right? None of us is as smart as all of us, so we can put our heads together and make a difference. And so that's what we're here to do, right? So I love this group and what you're accomplishing. And as we look at the domain controller, here, I want to be clear that protection of the domain controller, it's not a novel idea by any stretch, right? We're not going to produce any groundbreaking mitigation steps by the end of this presentation. But when we consider that the cybersecurity industry is projected to become an economy unto itself worth over $1 trillion within this year, within 2021. It's brought on by as much noise as it is actual concern. What I'm talking about is a multitude of technology vendors want to position their products in a way that promises to stop all hacks. A lot of them promote that stops everything, or that artificial intelligence and machine learning can automate your security program entirely. And what we want to do is cut through the distraction and bring back good old solid cyber hygiene. Right? That's what we don't want to do. We want to be so enthralled by technology and what it's bringing in terms of promise, and forget about some of the basics that may have been forgone, and saying, well, we got technology now. That is our protector. And that's why I think we're trying to focus and today here for this evening or this afternoon, protecting the domain controller and level setting that. So I guess to really level set that for maybe the non-administrators, why is that so important? And this is really why. If you look at this visual, it's arguably the heart of any centralized network where administrative access and capabilities are concerned. So when we consider the technical risk that quickly becomes business risk and impact, we need to think more like our attackers do. What are my centers of gravity that, if compromised, provide the greatest potential for attacker success and my own detriment, essentially. So, just like, and I forget the gentleman who was speaking about, hey, I got to find my holes, I got to plug them, and sooner or later I'm going to run out of fingers and toes. So I've got to at least look and have good eyes on everywhere I can have technology. And so that's what we're trying to do, is create this mindset. What are my centers of gravity though? If I had to only protect one thing, what is it, right? So again, just providing some focus on that. So when we think like humans, we're more apt to counter the human adversary. So our enemy isn't technology. And without really going into politics, and Chris, I love your stuff there. So I'm going to use, instead of using the gun analogy, let's use the lightsaber. The lightsaber itself, right, is a multiplier that can be used in the hands of good and evil alike, right? It doesn't matter who's wielding it, right? It's a tool that is used. And so when human will exploit a center of gravity like a domain controller, controller for maximum effect. And that's exactly what our pen testing team, sets out to do as well when they do these ethical hacking exercise or penetration testing exercises for clients. And once they have domain controller, it's checkmate, right? That's the situation or the jewel that they're going for. Unfortunately, that's an exercise that has a start and a stop. Unfortunately, a checkmate situation like this in the real world is the precursor to, we'll just say, the stuff hitting, hitting the fan, I guess. So, let's look at some of these domain controller compromises and in our experience in dealing with incidents, and that experience is very deep and very wide in terms of incident response engagements. With dealing with, again, these systemic exploits, like ransomware. It's almost always the domain controller that is ultimately compromised when an attacker effectuates an enterprise-wide attack. This has been established too by a lot of research groups, insurance companies, and I'm telling you, insurance, the bar raised for cyber insurance. Now, it's not really talked about widely right now, but that's going up. That's going up high. They are now making decisions. Are you insurable? Now, and what are you doing to protect your assets, including your centers of gravity or your crown jewels, right? So this has been confirmed again through our liaisons that this is really a central area. If you had to tighten back and fall back and protect something within your network to avoid a systemic type of issue, then it's really coming back to the domain controllers. And yes, attacks at, it has to be said, attacks at smaller companies need only impact maybe a couple of machines for maximum effect. An attacker will exploit them in a way, maybe like through a business email compromise, and it could have a detrimental effect. And again, email being that avenue, it's a favorite target even for larger companies, and then on its own merits can be considered that center of gravity. So you've got to protect email, you've got to do training, you've got to do those things. But it's really essentially an access path for lateral movements, right? An attacker, an enterprise company is still trying to get the domain controller so they can effectuate that system enterprise wide attack. So let's look at impacts on the domain controllers. Now, I don't think we need to spend a whole lot of time here because everyone can imagine the impacts, the risks that are going to befall an organization that is compromised in this way. But there are numerous examples of, again, businesses that range from, I think, impacts from slight interruption to permanent closing of the doors. There's one case that happened this past October, a telemarketing firm in Arkansas, and I believe, it was the 2020 October timeframe. They suffered a ransomware attack and could never fully recover. And right before the holidays, right, arguably their busiest season, a telemarketing group closed its doors, leaving 300 people out of work. And this despite the fact that they paid the ransom, received the keys from decryption, and they could not, recover. So this is a story that's happened to a number of small businesses as well as large organizations, including service firms, medical practices, and others. And the reality is, even if you're able to recover, the toll can be impacting in both direct and indirect ways, ranging from dollars to your, I guess, the perception of you as a business, the trustworthiness in the market, not to mention hefty compliance and other legal type exposures. And to make matters worse, now we've got these bad actors that have evolved. Organizations have evolved in their controls. Hey, we can recover from this ransomware attack. We don't need to pay the ransom. We can restore. So let's restore and we're going to be good. Well, now what we do is have attackers that are turning from ransom to extortion in terms of their methods, meaning that even if you do not pay and you're able to recover, they may have exfiltrated your data offsite and are actually holding that hostage in a way to say, if you do not pay, That's great, you can recover, but if you don't pay now, we're going to release this to the public and embarrass you that way or incite regulatory issues. And so again, you've got attackers that are evolving every time that there's a tit, there's a tat, right, with respect to counter and countering that. So one thing for sure, it needs to be said that no industry is immune from something as an enterprise affecting issue like a ransomware attack or other breach, things that entail data exfiltration. Whether I'm a retail organization with consumer data like credit cards, or a healthcare company with loads of PHI, a manufacturer where I can measure the cost of downtime, or frankly, if I am a small nonprofit group, if an attacker can come in and effectuate ransomware in order to monetize their efforts, then it doesn't matter, what kind of business you're in. If that's going to impact you, then you're either forced to pay, forced to recover, or forced to close your doors. Those are really, the options. And now it's consolidated to pay and, or close your doors, because of the extortion, factor. So again, we're continuing to see an evolution of methods in as much as we are with controls that are being put in place. So if you're familiar with something called the MITRE attack framework, there's another one called the cyber kill chain. I think you'll find it useful on many fronts, because this really is a human-centric methodology for how an enterprise-wide attack begins, unfolds, and I guess I'll say fully takes root until it's detected. Which in some cases may never be detected, depending on the motivations of the attacker. Right? They may decide I'm just in here for espionage, or I'm in here to for other things. And corporate espionage is just as real as state espionage, particularly for places like manufacturing companies. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the MITRE framework. It's spelled MITRE, and I would encourage anyone, if you're not familiar with it, to go and research that, because that really outlines what an attacker is doing in terms of getting an initial foothold, doing reconnaissance first, getting initial foothold, and expanding that through lateral movements. It's again very highly interesting, but can jump really technical very quickly, and would take a lot of time to go through all the 14 phases. So at a high level, when we're talking about, I think the 10th of 14 phases, that's the lateral movement portion. That's what they're trying to do. If they can't get admin authority or access right away, they're going to keep trying if they can get a foothold, and they're going to do different things. They're going to social engineer on the inside, or try even brute forcing on the inside when they get a foothold. They're going to do all kinds of things to see if they can further their attack, because now that they're in, right, tested the doors, tested the windows, tested the gate. A lot of times we tell our clients too, it's that old analogy, if or the story where if you and a friend are running through the woods and a bear is chasing you, you don't need to outrun the bear, right? That's kind of a flippant way of in a Morbic way of looking at it. But the reality is sometimes in security too, you don't have to spend $1 million. You can't strive to become Fort Knox. It's untenable, unsustainable, and it would just cost a fortune to try to do. So sometimes being good enough. Lock your doors, lock your windows, lock your gates, because most attacks, yes, there are certainly targeted attacks, but there are mostly attacks of opportunity where they're going to try that. If they can't get in, well, again, attackers, I don't want to say they're lazy necessarily, but they're going to try to find the low-hanging fruit. This is too secure, let's move on, right? If you can get to a point of discouragement, well, that's certainly a win as well. But you still have to protect things like the domain controller, on the inside with the most that you can. And so, when we see attackers that get in and start performing these lateral movements, they can be in the environments for several days, weeks, months, years, depending on what their primary objective is. And that may not entail effectuating ransomware or an attack, but continue to collect information, like I said, for purposes of espionage, and maybe exfiltrating light loads of data along the way to continue to avoid detection. And so, whether or not their actions are detected along the way or their activities are stopped, they're going to, continue to proceed. And, what's the let's see, just the thought I had, the dwell time, I'll call it the dwell time, okay, that we see a typical, and there's studies that are done on this, for an attacker to be in a target environment ranges anywhere from 3 to 9 months, right? And that's continuing to increase. If you think about the state-based actors that have been in the SolarWinds environment, we're talking, in the upwards over a year at this point. Same thing with Exchange, and it might be difficult for some people to believe that an attacker can not only be in the environment for that long a time, but then slip away potentially if their objective was to exfiltrate data and to simply leave. Now, this may not be the best analogy to that. Again, I love to speak in analogies, and you'll have to forgive me for this one, but if you're outdoors, and California may not have to worry about this too much, but bear with me. Let's say that you're vacationing in Florida, in the summer. Now, you're not going to be able to detect every mosquito bite as it's happening. But the next day when you're scratching at your ankles, on the top of your feet and notice all the bites, it might surprise you how many got through, considering that you killed a dozen or more that landed on your head, your forearm, your shoulders, and everything else. Attacks are that plentiful. They're happening so much that it's not, that a lot of them just don't get detected, or you're not in a position to detect it in the first place. So I think it's important to talk about, here what we have, some common paths that can lead to exploiting the domain controller. Again, nothing earth-shattering here. These are all things that that have been schooled into before, but it's important just to bring them up to reinforce the importance. So compromised credentials, right? This can provide one of the most expeditious paths to a domain controller, particularly if the organization is not as guarded with their administrative domain privileges. Oftentimes we've seen vendors, for instance, having domain access capabilities or privileges. And in those cases, some cases their credentials are so static, meaning they never change, right? They never change, and they're shared and remain in play for perpetuity. So if you can imagine the expanded knowledge of those credentials as people move on from organization to organization, and those credentials remain effective, they may say, wow, I just want to go out there and see if this is effective. Wow, it is. And some of the more less scrupulous ones are going to sell that. A lot of this information ends up on the dark web, not just because there's a knowledge of it, because maybe defaults haven't been changed, right? There's a whole list on a website that has a whole list of what some default passwords are for different technologies, and those are the first ones they're going to try. They're going to load their dictionary attack up for their brute force tools and try every one of those first, and see if they can run through and get a hit. This is, I love that. When the gentleman was doing the book about home security, the first thing you probably have, and one of the first things in your book, at least in terms of setting up your gear at home, is changing your default password on your router, right? I mean, it's amazing how many times you see that. I'll see family members, I'll check them, and geez, you haven't changed your password yet from password, and your username from admin. Let's do that now, right? Because it's an easy way in. So you couple weaknesses like that with remote desktop protocol being enabled, and it's not just the enablement. And the reality is, if you're doing a vulnerability scan and you have port 3389 open, that is essentially RDP, it's not going to note it as a vulnerability. It's a legitimate tool. It's a legitimate service, right? But if that provides that way in, you probably want to lend more protection to it. Now, we're always going to inquire with our clients to say, why is that open? Is there a business reason, for that to be open? Because all it takes is them to get through, and now lateral movement's not needed, because if they have direct access to a domain administrative system through RDP, they're in. Okay, and it's that whole checkmate, situation. So again, it's pretty sure that attackers are going to try knocking on that door, and if they can get in, with a password and automatically have the privileges, then it's going to be easy for them. Same with SMB, right? If I've got an access path through SMB, I can enable privilege escalation in some ways, conduct lateral movements that ultimately hit the domain controller. That's my goal. Now I have that, I can do anything. I can do ransomware. I can do crypto mining, if that's what I want to do. I can do further espionage and create user accounts. I can stay in perpetuity if you're not going to discover what my actions are going to be. Let's talk about VPNs, quickly, because they've become fairly ubiquitous, and rightfully so, as they essentially provide a screening channel into protected environments. And it's not difficult to initiate an attack that starts with compromised credentials, right? If multi-factor authentication is not applied, because then an attacker continue onward and further the lateral movement, right? So VPNs become a source if the password is static and is not met with a second factor. We're going to talk about multi-factor here in just a bit. But then there's the domain controller itself. If I can exploit a known vulnerability that isn't patched, or even an application that's loaded on there, then I've got a clear shot at gaining command. Again, very little effort and high reward. So look, there are a number of other paths to consider, but these are the most common techniques that ultimately serve to exploit the domain controller and gain complete administrative privilege, and that can affect the enterprise environment. Let's go to the next one. So let's talk about the best methods now and just reinforce these. Again, these are all methods that you're going to have heard at some point, but let's bring them all together as a critical path so we can consider a defense in depth. Sometimes organizations will be good at one of these, but yeah, it's too much for me to try to push this into my organization. I'll never get the support. I'll never get the buy-in. So I'm going to start and fight my battles where I can and just do one or maybe two of these, or it's not even understood what the threats might be. But let's hone in on some of these protective measures, and I'd love to talk about them as a group too, to see there are other things. Certainly, this is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good starting point. Again, it's a critical path, for good security. So, I mean, these are, I guess I'm still surprised, when I see, some of these that are not fully implemented, like multi-factor authentication now. I mean, we've already established that a static password as a single means of authentication is not only dangerous, but the risk is multiplied further if that password never changes, right? Or if it has a direct path to administrative capabilities. And so ensuring that system passwords that don't change, for instance, are carefully protected, right? So if I have a system password that's coded in, I want to make sure that I've turned off the ability to log into that from certain machines. And you can do that, right? There are certain controls that you can put in place where this password can't change because it's systems talk to it, but limit or disable the direct login where possible. In order to do that, facilitate that. Another good hygiene function, vulnerability management. I talked about that a little bit. So if I can eliminate the potential for a direct exploit at the domain controller or anything that's directly connected with it, I've at least limited one vector and I'm a little better protected. Because the DC, the domain controller, is a sensitive catalyst, it's not uncommon that we see delays in patching the domain controller system when priority actually should be given to what performing that level of remediation. So to expand on that, just what I'm essentially saying is, some groups will say, companies will say, wow, I can't shut that down, or that's a lot of risk if I do something wrong when I patch this, or if this patch, if I feel for whatever reason it's not fully vetted. And so you let the vulnerability persist when in fact, have a test environment where you can run that patch, make sure it works, it doesn't affect anything else, and do it at odd hours, when the production's at its lowest point. Those are some practices that you can do to make sure that you do apply the patching in the priority that it should be. I mentioned RDP, remote desktop protocol, but let's look at it again, because this is one we continue to see time and time again as a breach point. It is a common exploit path that organizations, we challenge them to really decide, is there first a business requirement for RDP to be enabled? And just because it doesn't show up, like I said, as a weighted risk on a vulnerability scan, doesn't mean that it doesn't create a high risk, opportunity, right? It's, again, a native service, just like, well, I guess I mentioned that, there are other native services too, BitLocker, mobile disk encryption, another one that can be used again. So if I've got domain controller authority, we've seen this attack too. This was an interesting one where the attacker actually used BitLocker as the ransomware tool, to be able to lock up the system, right? And again, I don't mean to speak flippantly about instances or cases like this, but that was one that sort of surprised me. It was, ingenious in some ways. Now, fortunately, the customer had turned on some verbose logs, and so we came into the incident response. We looked at the logs and found, the password for BitLocker, and we were able to help them restore. Thank goodness there wasn't any exfiltration, so they were able to get out of that one, right? So again, I go back to what the person said about the gates, the doors, checking those things. If I can eliminate those opportunities, then, I might be, I might be in a better position. So, just like RDP is welcoming anybody like they're walking through like a gate in a dark alley. Someone's going walking through, and if they have malfeasance on their mind, they're going to test it. If it can be easily open, they're going to continue on, right? If it's locked and they can't get in, they're going to get discouraged and maybe move on, to the next intended victim. So the bottom line is, if you have to enable RDP due to either some business need or system need, some constraint, then be sure to consider compensating controls that reduce the risk, right? So the thing about security, we can't be in the NO business, right? We have to be able to find a way. And so if there is a need for something and it's been established, find compensating controls, right? Registered only or registered origin only access, meaning that I can direct certain IPs or certain systems that are the only ones that are able to access, that port. Destination only access. I'm going to limit the inside to only a single machine, so I'm effectively walling it off in that way. That system, RDP system becomes an extension of the firewall in some ways. And of course, the venerable multi-factor, authentication. And so, we look at that, and I'll expand on multi-factor just a little bit for anybody who is not sure what it is, or just maybe think but essentially there are three key factors that can be used for authentication. Something that you have, let's start with something a password, right? You have a password, everybody has a password, and that's used as a factor for authentication. Something you have might be a token, either a phone that has an app on it that can randomly generate a token in sync with your authentication system. That might be something that you have, or old RSA cards or things like that, or something that you are, which is a biometric, a thumbprint, an iris scan, or something like that. So using two of those factors in conjunction together to get a successful login is essentially multi-factor, or also called two-factor authentication. So that's something that is very important, very elementary to make sure that you have in place. The other big thing too is some sort of defense filtering system for email that can be augmented with, maybe some outbound URL blocking capabilities. So if somebody does click on a link, and it's already known on a site somewhere, on a list, a blacklist of sorts, then that can be programmed in so it can be stopped. Now, again, bad actors get very sophisticated, and they'll set up new links, they'll set up new domains. So when we're monitoring, for instance, we're always looking for, again, that's the dynamic defense, is maybe a newly observed domain, a domain that's only 24 hours or less old. If we see that, that's going to generate a hunt by a person to go in and look at that further and determine if that domain is legitimate or not, especially if a system is talking to it and there's a connection established. Okay, so that's email. Business email compromise is a very wide and prominent attack vector now, and we see a lot of incidents and exploits start with that. So it could be either BEC, business email compromise, or RDP are probably the two most prolific paths for exploit that we see. So again, getting your arms around those, you can ward off the majority of those types of attacks. Now, the reality is, if somebody wants what you have, if it's a targeted attack, attacks of opportunity are one thing, right? You don't want to be among the masses, people unfortunate that, hey, we had this open, so the attacker came in and took it. Attacks of opportunity are different from targeted attacks, which certainly, if somebody wants what you have with enough time, resources, dollars, everything else, they're probably going to get in some capacity. They're just going to be patient. Now, again, that's not to bring back the discouragement, but man, let's ward off the likelihood of the wider attack of opportunity by doing, some of these things. So trim the attack surface, if you will. So it's same thing with getting your arms around SMB, particularly or similar to RDP or remote desktop protocol. Sometimes it's required for application functionality, and you can't get away from having it enabled. But again, compensating controls are required to limit that risk opportunity, whether it's segmentation or special monitoring of those systems. And there are other practices and technologies even to use to facilitate that. The key is not to accept the control risk. Don't just say, well, I have to have it. I'm not going to do anything else about it because the service itself is deemed necessary. Trim the attack surface to reduce the likelihood of exploit. That's what it's about. Let's limit the likelihood. We can never get to zero defect, can never get to zero risk. It is a panacea that just can never be accomplished. So don't try. Limit your risk to your level of tolerance and to what is more of a likely type of exploit path, and you're going to be best served in that way. Defense in depth is key, and the level of depth continues to evolve just as the risk landscape does. So networks can no longer be visualized as these circular containment points, particularly with cloud and SaaS and other protruding access platforms. I mean, I used to draw network diagrams on the screen that started with nice concentric circles. You got your outer layer, you've got your, which is the network, you've got the inner, which is the infrastructure, and the center, the soft center, which is the data. Well, anymore, a network diagram looks like a sea mine, right? It's got all these protrusions sticking out of it because you're reaching out to the cloud, because you're reaching out to trusted sites or business to business connections. And, that's the reality. That's the way, the digital transformation has taken us to this interconnectivity. And so having a level of defense in depth is important to make sure activities are logged and monitored to detect unusual lateral movements or other anomalies that may be indicators of attack. Dynamic defense. Don't rely on prevent controls only. And here's, the secret that a lot of security professionals have learned that some companies still haven't is prevent is great. If I can leverage a level of prevent control to its maximum effect, then that's great. But if you go over that, and here's where I'm going is, too much prevent, you're stopping everything, including legitimate traffic, and you can't monitor for legitimate from illegitimate traffic. Where conversely, if you have all detect, right, then, or no, let's go back to prevent. Conversely, if you turn it low, then you're letting too much through, right? So you have to balance it with good, strong detect. Yes, let's prevent certain things because I know that I don't want anybody here, of any sort. So let's prevent that. And then let's funnel them into an area where I can put more detection, strong detection, and be able to see these things as they're happening. So directly monitoring and lending focus to, the log output directly from the domain controller itself, such as failed logins, newly created administrator accounts, or new connections, or password changes, all of those things, particularly at that domain controller. Let's hone in on that. Let's make sure we're getting those logs and we're reviewing them in real time. So that might take a 24/7 SOC operation to be able to assist you in doing that. So again, limit the attack surface. That's really what the key is. And like I always try to say, plan to avoid, but prepare to respond. Again, let's maximize prevent, but we've got to have detection. We've got to have response. And so a good incident response plan that is exercised often among stakeholders is a necessary component to a security program. And in some regulatory practices or it's required, right? So HIPAA, for instance, it's a requirement to have a tested disaster or recovery plan that involves executives, in it. So know my centers of gravity. Where am I most weak, or what is the crown jewels that I have that not only includes components like the domain controller, but data sets. I can't encrypt everything. I can't protect everything with the same rigor. So if I know where my most valuable data lies, and I know who wants it and how vulnerable it is, I can protect it in kind to be able to get it to just enough. So again, right size security that is in line with my level of tolerance or paranoia, if you want to say it another way. So know my centers of gravity and the risk that they play within my environment. And that's it puts me in a better position to not only reduce the occurrence, but reduce the impact through quick and precise decision-based response, right? So if I know I'm putting extra eyes on this, I see something happening, I'm responding right away, I could probably thwart, a larger compromise, right? Something that's going to be reportable or that's actually going to affect stakeholders like customers or things like that. So again, very important to lend these levels of protection. None of these are novel. None of these are really new. It's coming back to good cyber hygiene. But again, what I always use, again, I'll use one more analogy I'll leave you with is, sometimes technology or IT in general can be like a comet where, you got that head that is just plowing through and everybody's enthralled by that. And they look at the tail and it's trailing off. As we leave other things behind, antiquated technologies or old ways of doing things, sometimes we got to circle back to that. We can't leave that behind. We have to pull everything forward to make sure we're lending the same level of protection to the antiquated as much as we are the novel. And so that becomes a very important endeavor. Know what you have and always be cognizant of it and make sure that you're protecting it in kind with the level of diligence that's required. So we covered a lot here, and for many people, on the call here, this again seems pretty basic. A lot of professionals on here, and this is great, but it does call out necessary focus, to protection of these critical components. And these are good practices for the opportunity to put itself in the best position to succeed in this crazy and never-ending and daunting security game. And success is just being good enough sometimes to thwart the larger attack. So, with that, let's open it up to questions, thoughts. Maybe I'm just full of it, or I'm simplifying it, but I'd love to hear what everyone has to say.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so very, very much, Ron. That was great. Good, nice perspective, nice overview of things. I always look at these kinds of matters as, starting with that question of the need for reasonable security and the lawyers not yet having fully fleshed out exactly what is reasonable. And so there's a lot of ambiguity in that. I was thinking about that as I mentioned, the hotel, the inn we're staying at does not have reasonable security. I would wonder, question for you on what we just went through, what you just took us through. Don't you think by now things like patching and multi-factor authentication and all almost become minimum standards for reasonableness for ordinary companies?
I would say yes. I would agree with you. That the problem I see is that minimum standard becomes lost or deprioritized when you have one administrator that is not only in charge of patching systems, but even keeping them from failing in the first place. The connectivity of them, the other maintenance factors. There's so many different things that might be on the plate, and so what we have is too much responsibility, maybe on a single person or a single team. And if they don't have the right risk perspective, but they're not inculcated with a sense of security that really helps them prioritize that and think, wow, I'm creating holes here. These holes are getting wider the longer I go without patching them, then they may never lend the same priority. So it becomes a matter of, and I don't mean competency in saying, with ignorance or stupidity. I just mean it in, they may not have the appreciation for security.
Well, that's to me is a very good point, because it's what we talked just a moment about beforehand, that a human condition is that we don't know what we don't know.
Yes.
And what we're talking about with security, both with our experience, is both with IT and with executives, is that neither knows what they don't know. And that's a very dangerous situation to be in.
Indeed.
Other comments, other thoughts? Come on, don't everybody speak up all at once.
I was just going to say it's interesting that you indicate there's no way to put 100% security around anything. Anybody who says they've got their site 100% secure, there's no way. I've been an advocate for bring in some kids or some hackers that want to try and find out where your vulnerabilities are.
Yeah.
Instead of having to go pay a big company sometimes, right? Start there. And then you'll see if they really are, because, like you said, if they really want to get in, they'll get in, right?
Yeah.
And some of us are small time. They're not really going to go after us, but every once in a while they do. We have the personal attacks on credit cards or whatever it may be. And because I'm in staffing, I get the attempts, the phishing attempts all the time from all over the place.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you're right. I mean, the one thing I would caution against, and I think it's a great idea. Look, if I need to get some kind of look at my systems, then I'm going to bring somebody in to do it, and I don't care who it is. If somebody can, find the holes, then that's great. The art of penetration testing, and I don't mean to sound too, haughty-taughty about it, but it can be dangerous in itself if you don't know how a system's going to react to a certain scan or a tool that's performing an exploit. You can easily bring that system down, and so it's important to vet your security vendors and practitioners that are going to come in and do this stuff in the same way you would any other service that you're going to have performed, because it can be very dangerous. Networks can be taken down, data can be lost, and it's an unfortunate case if that does happen, but it does happen.
So that's a good point, Ron. We always work with our clients. We make absolutely sure before we start.
Well, you always need the experts, definitely. But I just thought, the only reason I thought about that aspect is like students looking for scholarships.
Yes.
Give them aspects, and then the ones that actually figure something out, you give some scholarship money or something like that. But
yeah, I love that idea. Especially if you can, plug them in too, to other, places that are looking for that kind of talent, but giving them, a path, to do this. And what I would even say, Diane, you can direct them to, there's a set of tools out there, the Kali Linux distribution. So KALI, which is a free set of tools, right? That a lot of, beginning, white hats, black hats, whoever, again, it's like the lightsaber. It's a tool that can be used for good or bad, but it's out there, and they're free. And there's I don't forget what the last count. I don't know how many tools, but I remember when it was called Backtrack, and it had probably 100 different programs that were used for different facets of not only reconnaissance but brute force attacking, scanning and even conducting exploits. So but it's a great tool set for beginners. And so if you're mentoring kids, bring them out there to see that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's also a good segue into final Secure the Village thoughts, if you will, Ron, because let me just switch from your screen back to mine.
Sure. Go ahead and stop here.
No, that's fine. I just want to, the reason I'm doing this most specifically is I want to talk about one of our programs. So forget this slide, but let's go to, I think it's this one. Let me just move things around on my, these are our programs. And if you notice, we've got a program on the third Tuesday of every month from 10 to 11:30 Pacific time. It's all about workforce. And we've got, my God, people from private industry, government, education, both employers and people who are doing training of people, entry-level positions. A woman up in Sacramento, Carmen Marsh, I was introduced to by George Usi, who's just recently joined the meeting today. He was late, but Carmen's got a program training women, in cybersecurity. There's a firm like US Valor that's training veterans for entry-level positions in cybersecurity. And one of the nonprofits that's part of this group is an organization called SYNED, SYNED, that is all about really cyber education, cybersecurity education, K through 12. They sponsor in California an annual Mayor's Cup competition, junior high school students. And I had the great pleasure of being at one of these a year ago, back before COVID, at East LA College, when we had half a dozen, just there at one location alone, half a dozen teams competing against each other in red team, blue team, attack, defend. And at the same time we were in East LA College doing this, there were other colleges up and down the state that SYNED had organized, part of California Cyber Hub, and we had just a statewide competition. And the winning team here in our area, which is Hollywood High School, which is like super, they got to get their presentation done at a city council meeting here in Los Angeles. I mean, you think about these kids, these are high school kids getting to go to a city council meeting all around cybersecurity. It's like fabulous that way. That's a program that we've got that just ties in with Di and Ron, what you were each talking about that way. That's why I kind of wanted to jump in and mention this. Not all of you may know it. Yeah. So, and just, continuing along, that's one of our programs. This group meets once a month, focus around technology and security management. We've got two groups that just meet very open-ended. It's lawyers and insurance people and, security professionals like I am, IT vendors, all of that. We got two of those groups that meet a month. Our financial services cybersecurity roundtable also meets monthly. We just had a great meeting last week. And then Steve Krantz will host periodic meetings designed for residents. We've had them on disinformation, and you've done what, 3, Steve, on bullying, I think? Yep, to help families help their kids when they're going through bullying things. So this is kind of some of the stuff that we do that we're actually quite proud of, just moving the thing along, the cybersecurity thing. And ultimately, we need everybody to get involved. I mean, Ron, please join with us on a regular basis. I think you guys are on our village square as cyber leaders and cyber partners, but do that. As you go out, if you're giving talks, events publicly, let us know. We'd be delighted to host them. This meeting will go on our educational channel. It'll be on the website as part of the library. Become a sponsor. We're just beginning, just like we're beginning a marketing program, we're really beginning a very, very major sponsorship program as well. We've been blessed that the company that bought my company is a major 3-year sponsor that's let us do the growing that we are now doing with the new website and all. But they're generous as they are, there's so much more we could be doing with more money. Mm-hmm. And so we're now out to raise it, that way. So everybody think about being sponsors that way. How was the meeting? What did people think? Any comments? A couple of you came late, Josh and George, so you didn't get to hear all the talk, but glad you're here. How'd the meeting work?
Well, this is Mark. I thought there were some very good tips, and interesting because, as you know, Stan, I'm just kind of like wading through level 1 here on a A+ course. But it was interesting that there were several items that he brought up that were like dead on with things that I'm already encountering, including this SMB referral that he gave. So I really liked it.
Cool. Good.
Yeah.
Good. We love that. Yeah. Chris, Rick, Michael, George, you don't get to answer because you got here late. So, yeah.
Sorry, folks.
But Michael, what'd you think? Unmute. Yeah.
No. I mean, I mute because we work from home and there's noise.
Right.
So I don't want to, I'm very respectful, don't want to disturb the meeting. I thought it was very informative. You know, I'm always learning something every time I come here. I'm hoping that as per usual, the deck and everything and this recording is available on the STV website, so I can go back and review it. A lot of times I like to listen to it again and take notes. It's hard for me to take notes when the presentation is actually going on. But I felt that Ron, now, you know, you had some really good insights, and, you know, it fits in with what I look at people is, where are the gaps, where are the holes, where can we help fill those in? And, you know, even for myself, you don't know where they are unless you know what they are, right?
Yeah.
And so I felt that Ron brought up some good points about some areas that I may not have thought about or looked at it in a more in-depth way. So he just pointed out a few more. If we use my house analogy, pointed out a few more vents and a few more crevices here and there that you know what, I need to look in and see, you know, make sure that I check those when I do my security, you know, analysis, and I'm looking at things. So thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. I look forward to rehearing it and kind of honing in on those items. So I thought it was really good.
Yes, I'll certainly make this available, Stan,
Mhm.
to you, so that you have it and can
Sure.
can
Yeah,
share.
that would be great if you could also get us the slides, and we'll put a PDF of those right attached to the same library entry, so to speak, library card entry, with that links to the video. The video will go on our YouTube channel, and we link to it from that, and that'll be up sometime over the next by the end of the weekend, typically.
And I just wanted to add, this is Mariana. Again, we're always going out doing some thought leadership. Stan, I know I've told you about it. We do a lot with lawyers and insurance providers to get out to the community, to people. They're always looking to meet new folks. I know it sounds strange, but again, we do partner with other incident response firms. We partner with other MSSPs. We partner with other folks that compete with us in some instances, but not others. And it helps us be creative when structuring relationships. So don't be shy about reaching out. If you guys want to sit and talk or pick Ron's brain or Doug's brain, I know some of you guys have met Doug before as well, or call me personally in case you guys need anything. We're always happy to see. Again, I think the ultimate goal here is to strengthen the community as a whole, and not just to keep everything. There's so much cyber. There's enough to share for everybody. So, you know, I think that the goal is, let's make sure everyone has the information and that we help each other out. And again, don't be shy about reaching out, please.
So, I mean, I like to use a term, it sounds kind of funny, but co-opetition.
Yes.
So I think it's really important, especially when we're in this space and we're networking and we're looking together, that in areas where we can cooperate, you know, and exchange business, then we do that. In areas where we compete, then, you know, we compete. But co-opetition, I think, is the key, because then as a whole, takes a village, right, Stan? Then, you know, we fully protect, and I agree with you, Mariana, that there's more than enough out there that we can certainly work together, and where you guys are a fit, then it makes sense for you guys to be the fit, where services that myself or others on the call provide are a better fit, then, you know, we find there's no need to put a square peg into a round hole. You know, we got enough talent here to put the right pieces in the right place. I agree.
So very, very true. And the same with our firm, Miller Kaplan. There are things we do you probably may not do. I know there are things you do that we do not do. Rick, you had something to say as well. Yeah.
First, thanks, Ron. Very nice overview. And being in this field for a very long time, I'm always looking for a little more in depth. Maybe a good thing to follow on would be something to drill down a little bit. For instance, when I roll out a new DC, the first thing I do is harden the machine. You talked about that a little bit. And we could actually talk about best practices, what services to disable, which ones that you might want to enable and under what circumstances, just like you would harden a firewall, a perimeter firewall. Different levels of, as we all know, security is a layered approach. So a little bit, and I know in a short happy hour like this year, it's way too much, but it might be a good follow-on for some of the people here. If they're interested.
Yeah, a good technical section could be going into minimum baseline standards for, certain texts, like, look, everyone's got this, everyone's got this or this, and being able to say this is, again, port services, whatever, best practices. And, above all, the very first one across the board is change the darn default password. Applies to
But that's what
everyone at
this
home
forum,
as well as at work.
yeah, that's what this forum is supposed to be about, right? Everybody start building on ideas and saying what we need, better at it, and help other people as well. The majority of people don't even know. I mean, we attend these events because we know something. Still don't know enough, but there's always more to learn. So if you have anybody to recommend as well, for the next one, let Stan know. Maybe even more than one person to bounce ideas off of.
And Rick, you just brought up, sorry, Dan.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, Rick, you just brought up an interesting issue, like about hardening, servers and things when you set them up. I think our company is heavily involved, as Stan knows, and we presented a few weeks ago in the patching area and software deployment space. People don't often realize, they think that when they see a patch that comes out on Patch Tuesday from Microsoft or things like that, that their CVE is recognized and that they are protected if they've patched. But we see instances across our clients where they think they're patched because they rolled out all the patches and the updates they were supposed to, and then we realize, well, there were patches back from 2017 that, sure, they applied the patches, but the patch just gave you the ability to select the options or the controls that you need to put in place in the OS in order to have the hardening and protection you need. Just because they applied the patch, it's like, they're still flagging, and it's like they don't understand why they're flagging. Well, you're flagging because the patch gave you the capability. But what was missing was the know-how, right? And what the implications of that patch were and what you needed to adjust in order to be actually protected. And so
there's no substitute for digging in deeper. Yeah.
Well said, Rick. Yeah. Well, and that's a good segue to next month, which is April 27th, which, if you were paying careful attention, you noticed that I changed in real time from what it said originally, March 27th, because I failed to make that change. But next month, our speaker is MJ Shore. And CompTIA has started an ISHOW, an information sharing and analysis organization, centered around MSPs, MSSPs, IT vendors, that whole space. And that's sharing at a different level than the kind of sharing that we're talking about here. That's sharing things like indicators of compromise, sharing firewall information that can go automated back and forth. We detect an attack, we alert, the ISHOW. The ISHOW takes that alert and broadcasts it to all the other ISHOWs in the group, and all this happens firewall to firewall to firewall. That's that's part of where we're headed here. So MJ is going to be our guest next month, April 27th, also 4 to 5:30. Just in finishing up, always like to talk about, I'm also an author, not on a technology book. This is a book I wrote. It's a series of essays I started writing in the Thanksgiving after 9/11. And these are all essays as I searched for my own soul of America, up above the political battle, not red, right, left, Republican, Democrat, pro this, anti that. It's what's the Declaration of Independence mean? What's the preamble mean? And things like that. That's where I found myself writing. So that's available on Amazon, should you want it. And with that, again, Ron, I just want to be I want to say just how grateful we are that you took your time to spend with us today. Mariana, thank you as well. You're the kind of the person who made all this happen. So thank you as well. And
Anytime.
Guy, as always, thank you for co-hosting this with me. And thanks to all of you for being here, for being part of what we're doing. And as we grow, I look forward to continuing to see you all around the table, the virtual table, so to speak, every month. And with, as I said, look forward to seeing you next month. So let me stop sharing. And any final words before we end?
Dan, I just want to ask you a question. I apologize late. I had a meeting that ran into this, but
Mhm.
do you have anything in between the meetings? Like, is there a Secure the Village discussion
Mhm.
somewhere
Yeah.
happening online
Two
that
of
I
those a
don't?
month. Yeah, we've got 7 meetings a month, 2 of which are just general discussions. I mentioned them when I showed the programs. One's on a Monday night once a month, and one's on, I think, a Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon. I think Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, I meant more like, is there like a, I don't know, a forum, some kind of a Reddit, whatever. So something where, if you have a question, you want to put it out to everybody in the village, you can. And that kind of.
We're not formally set up like that now, but certainly send me an email, stan@securethevillage.org.
Okay.
Browse through the village square, see if there are people there who might know the answer already.
Sure.
Yeah,
I just was wondering if there's like I'm missing an online discussion component, right?
not yet.
Okay, not yet.
It's getting there.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah, we've talked about it, but at this point, the next phase of where we're headed is out into the marketing and development areas, essentially, so that we can begin to get the resources to do all those kinds of things.
You know what, Stan, we had talked about it in one of the other forums recently. And Joshua, like you're talking about, kind of like, Reddit, and what's one of the other ones, the Discogs or whatever, where it's, a lot of collaboration with the techies, right? And asking questions and.
Yeah.
Right.
We talked also about like just giving everybody that's connected in with these groups access into a share file, a SharePoint, sorry. But creating SharePoint folders, one for this one for the others, and so on. But stay tuned on all of that.
Give Stan ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever the community needs,
Yep.
I'm all for, so long as we've got the money to pay for it. That's the kicker there. I got the money to keep where we're growing now, but I got to use my resources to get more money ultimately. And the next big thing we'll do, the next big tranche of money that we get in, I want to do some real serious strategic planning. I come from an area of business consulting as well as all my security work, where I understand how really important dynamic strategic planning is. Not something to do you put up on a shelf, but something you live with day in, day out. And that's the next place we have to go. So, but certainly throw the ideas out, keep them going, as Di says. Yeah.
And no Slack channel just yet, right, Stan?
That's right. Yeah. And as Ron, as you said, you'll see it if you do a search on our website. Nobody's as smart as everybody. It takes the village, all of us working together. Yeah. So,
And I can probably try, if it works for everybody, or if you guys are interested, having either a cybersecurity attorney or an insurer or carrier or broker come on in so that they can talk to us about their perspective and how they approach cybersecurity from either a legal perspective or regulatory perspective, as well as from the insurance perspective, reinsurance, what they're seeing.
Yeah.
I know the cyber market has done a complete flip on the insurance side. They're not renewing policies like they're used to. Rates have gone up by 2, 3, 50%. I mean, it's crazy. So if you guys would like, and Stan, I'll leave it to you, just wanted to put it out there.
Mariana,
Happy to bring someone on.
have them join our 2 open-ended discussion groups.
Okay.
We've already got lawyers that come to those. They're attorneys I've worked with for 20 years in this space that are not always there, but regular there. Some on privacy, some on security, more. And but it's not this or them. It's what Michael said, the whole co-opetition piece. So
Yep, absolutely.
bring them on. Well, let's get these discussions going. We had a great conference last October on reasonable security. There we had, Jason Meshko, who you know, Mariana, because that's how we know each other. He was one of the insurance panelists, and we had 4 or 5 attorneys that were part of that. We had
was on there.
myself and another, I think 3. George was part of that, George Usey. So we had technical people and lawyers and insurance, all collectively collaborating on how do we get our heads around reasonableness? Because that's a big question.
But what's reasonable to each business function? That's
That's
kind
right.
of the,
That's right. And yet, how do we, in a collective way, give advice? I mean, we have a whole section on our website. If you look at the library on something we did about 3 years ago, still based on the Center for Internet Security version 6. So it's somewhat out of date, but it's what's a minimum reasonableness? You know, if you're subject to California Consumer Privacy Act, we took that as our base. What's the least you have to do so that you can stand up and at least argue that what you've got is reasonable?
right.
And I thought about that as, I said, some of you got on late. The hotel we're staying at, I'll name them, the Ojai Valley Inn, does not have Wi-Fi password. There's no even, to registration for the Wi-Fi, you just come log in. And it's like, that's not reasonableness. No, if these guys get breached, plaintiff's attorney is going to have a field day. Just, you mean you didn't even have a password on your Wi-Fi? Go defend that, right? So somewhere there's minimum standards there. But so Mariana, bring them on. Everybody have them sign up, join us. Yeah. Any other?
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Again, Ron, thank you so much. Mariana, thanks for bringing Ron that way.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks everybody else. And
Thank you.
we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
evening.
Dan.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Pleasure to meet everyone.
Same.